Welcome, Travis Lawrence with Arrow ECS. Today we're bringing to you a live session that we did recently on Unified Hybrid Cloud. So Kevin Groat, our technical partner manager at VMware, and I had sort of an open discussion around what this means. So you may have seen this at VMworld talking about Unified Hybrid Cloud. What does that mean? Really the idea that we can take things like your on-premises infrastructure and connect that with vCloud Air and making that a more seamless experience. So in this session, we just really have an open dialogue on what does that mean, what other parts and pieces go into that. Things like NSX, Virtual SAN, and how no matter where you're at or where your customers are at and really in that journey, whether they have on-premises vSphere and they're really comfortable with that and they're just trying to drive more value out of that business, or if you have customers that are already using vCloud Air and really want to bring those things together and maybe you say, for my development environment, how can I actually leverage this and understand where it's most cost effective for me to run a workload and be able to have some portability in that scenario too, to say, maybe I started this test dev workload out in vCloud Air, how can I bring it back? But really understanding where can I take the next step, not having to say that, I have on-premises vSphere, we're comfortable with that, and we have to jump into this full-blown cloud environment where everything is automated. There's definitely steps that you can take in between there. So if you've seen some of our other sessions, this one's much less formal and just really, again, an open dialogue between Kevin and I. We ask that for future sessions, please join us. We'll start to open these up to say via Twitter, if you're following us on Twitter, or other avenues that we can really connect and have some open dialogue between the partners, you as reseller partners of Arrow. So as always, feel free to reach out to me at tlawrence@arrow.com or on Twitter at tlawrence. And with that, we will get into the session. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, so thanks everyone for joining today. We appreciate you being here. Today we're being brought to you on behalf of our good friends at Arrow. Arrow ECS is so gracious to continue to help us produce these videos, and today we're going to be talking about Unified Hybrid Cloud, specifically around the integration of things like stretched architecture. I guess that's the right way to say it, and how the changes that have been made inside of vRealize Automation 7, as well as VSAN 6.1 and NSX 6.2, how these really play to this bigger picture. And today I'm joined by your friend and mine, Mr. Travis Lawrence here at Arrow. Travis, say hola to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
And Travis is taking time for us today to help us work through this and hopefully to give us some commentary too on where Arrow sees all of this vision and how big a role Arrow has in investing into this. And this has been a pretty big week for us, hasn't it, Travis?
Yes.
We had we had a great event. Hopefully we can throw up a link to that event here. Travis, tell me what you thought about that event.
I thought we had really good attendance and really good excitement around that. So what that was is really a broadcast event where we talked about 9 different use cases, and Kevin covered a lot of this for NSX. So I think we see a lot about micro-segmentation. Everybody starts to get that. It's starting to click into place as far as what NSX can do there. But it was great that you could cover so many other use cases. There's so much that can be done when we actually have software-defined networking and we don't have to physically make those changes in the network. So from security to different ways of using vCloud Air and all those types of things. I think that was awesome, and we got a lot of interest, more than we really ever have before from our reseller partners. So
yeah,
awesome.
Well, one of my favorite use cases that was in there was the one, and everybody seems to love the graphic of the 2 turtles sitting in the little boxes.
Yes.
Right. But that was one of my favorites, and I think that was really interesting because it spoke to kind of the exposure that we have when we look at DevOps. And I saw this really great article out there called, it was on TechCrunch, and it was called "I Want to Run Stateful Containers Too." And in it, the author, a DevOps guy, basically likened the current state of DevOps with a lot of the cloud providers out there to, he said it's like renting a Star Destroyer from the Empire to try to blow up the Death Star.
Well, I gotta wrap my mind around that for a second.
Yeah. And so I think that kind of, speaks to, one of the first things I want to go to here. And so what I'm going to do, and Travis will still be able to hear you. So
Okay.
I'm going to, I'm going to share a screen, a little whiteboard here. And I'm going to drop this guy up and, okay. So cool. So Travis, you should be able to see me, and
Yes.
I should be able to see me. And so, kind of the idea that, I think is, kind of part and parcel to all of this conversation is that, we're really focused on two, clear paradigms. And I think this goes to what that guy in the DevOps, talk was saying, right? You've got your data center and your on-premise, life over here that you have pretty much just sovereign control over. You can do anything you want to it. And then, over here we have, these cloud-based ideas and, your off-premise life. And these two things really have been, kind of very much, disconnected. It's either on-premise or, it's off-premise, and that's just been kind of the way it was. And I think that, where this developer was coming from, he was saying, well, I've got all my workloads and all of this stuff sitting out inside of this cloud platform. But the person who owns my workload is the same person who's handing me the tool to try to use to interface with the workload. And so constantly I'm being shut out here. Mm-hmm. And so I can never really create any sort of, ubiquity inside of that space. And so, along comes, VMware. And we mentioned this thing at VMworld, and it was the idea of a unified hybrid cloud. And I've had a few people ask me, well, how is unified hybrid cloud different from hybrid cloud? And I think for me, hybrid cloud means that you have this and you have that, right? I mean, basically, and it's just like throwing switches. It's on or it's off. It's on or it's off. And it's binary. But unified hybrid cloud is a little bit of a different picture, because unified hybrid cloud means that both of these things are able to be perceived, by the consumer wherever, they are, as really, one set of resources, one, common interface into this space, whether it's on-premise, off-premise, and we're really snapping all of it together. So, I think that, not to get too long-winded, but I think a couple of the key technologies and things to bring up in this, we covered the compute bit, because, the compute is it's whatever, right? It's vSphere, over here, and, we've got our compute, out here, with, vCloud Air or, whatever cloud you're using. But the new stuff is talking about, and I think really important, talking about NSX and how networking is being stretched, across these distances. And then what we're doing inside of storage from a software-defined storage perspective, and how we're able to, now talk about, okay, well, maybe we have another data center over here. How are we able to stretch storage so that between multiple data centers and multiple clouds, we're creating that big ubiquitous, squishy mass of resources. So I think for me, that's kind of where I come from inside of this conversation. Travis, any thoughts on this? In kind of there's also the automation part, right?
Yes, yeah. But yeah, I would say no. That's what we're seeing. Our NSX team is seeing a lot of this, and to me, it really came into focus after VMworld digging in a little bit. We've always understood. We talk about vCloud Air and using that as sort of a hybrid cloud, and we could always import things via OVF or OVA or use vCloud Connector. but it really kind of clicks when you start talking about, oh, we have stretch layer 2 over VPN, or we can use even hybrid cloud manager and start to actually have this be something that's not, two parts that are sort of disparate, but a way that we can leverage these workloads and in either or, kind of as you mentioned. So I think customers are starting to really realize the power of that and understand what VMware says when they say unified hybrid cloud. What does that mean at that technical level? So they're starting to get it, I think. So.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes, speaking about automation, it goes into the idea of a fabric, right? And that's kind of the idea is that, fabric's made up of a lot of different threads, a lot of different things, and, different colors and all sorts of crazy, action. I don't know how to make fabric, but I'm just pretending that I do. But, then we say, we have to interface, with that fabric in some way. And this is where, vRealize automation comes in and giving us, kind of that big, wide swath across all of it, so that anybody who's interacting just interacts and they have a single point, and then it knows how to, interact across all of these, different fabrics and all of these different, spaces and all this good fun stuff. But that we're really creating something very simple and ubiquitous for the consumer, whether that's, a literal consumer or whether it's somebody who is, inside of another, department or something like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So, with that in mind, that we have, vRealize automation and VSAN and NSX. I think NSX is probably the, if there were a hot topic, I think that NSX is the hot topic, kind of far and away. So, Travis, what's happening at Arrow around NSX? And I'll see if I can pull up some information here I have about NSX 6.2.
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, that event we had yesterday was well received, but really our NSX team has seen a lot around the microsegmentation sort of messaging, but really customers are trying to understand beyond. So when we talk about unified hybrid cloud, what else can we do with this? It's great that we can, I think that's where we're starting to see traction, because we've been talking about microsegmentation for a long time. And that's really more of the enterprise resellers, enterprise customers that are at that point. But also, as you mentioned, the sort of meeting of NSX with vRealize automation, that really enables that piece to click into place. Because if you're trying to have an automated provisioning process, if you don't have the network piece solved there, it doesn't really help as much, really. There's value there, I think, to be able to provision a VM or an application. But if that networking piece is still a manual process or something the network team has to log into a console and make VLAN changes or whatnot, then so that's where we're starting to see customers say, okay, I see where this comes together. It's not necessarily just NSX or VRA, though there's use cases there, but it's really how can the more mature customers use all of that together. So.
Yeah, well, and I think that one of the big ideas and one of kind of the paradigm shifts that happened in NSX too is around the security model. For years doing things around stuff like SRM or whatever the case may be. It was really about taking what we know, and now we have to still layer on. Somebody's got to deal with the re-IPing of machines. Somebody's got to deal with what happens to the firewall rules, and rules and constructs like that, logical constructs of the data center, the paradigms that we put in place. Those are easily as important, if not even more important, sometimes than the workloads, because without those constructs, the workloads kind of fall apart. And you can definitely open yourself up to a lot of trouble if you're not being careful about the management of those constructs. I've got a little bit here, and I'll share this out with everyone. And really, the idea is it's talking about NSX and where NSX sat inside of 6.1 and earlier. And the thing with NSX inside of this space was that it really was kind of it was a very single vCenter type of idea. because you would have, you'd have one controller, you'd have your NSX manager here, which was, one primary, and then you'd have another primary over here, and then another primary over there. But the problem was so much of our other technologies were multi vCenter. They understood the concept of, going back to, linked mode, right? And then into SRM and then into, vSphere replication. All of these technologies really understood the concept of multiple vCenters, but NSX didn't. Mm-hmm. It only saw the one vCenter at a time. I'm in control. No, I'm in control. No, I'm in control. And so now with 6.2, it's a big change, because now we've got this idea of a distributed logical router that can go across the entire space, where we see really vCenter A, vCenter B, and vCenter C. And we have a primary as well as secondary controller concept inside of NSX. This is where we're getting this distributed logical router is now universal. And that universal concept is really kind of, I think key to bringing this forward, because now we're looking at what we can do with these workloads, not just inside of the data center, but also inter data center. Travis, do you think this kind of lines up with what we were talking about, with what your customers are starting to kind of get their aha moment with?
Yeah, I do, because as you mentioned, trying to make this part of a broader enterprise solution across multiple sites and vCenters, and tying it in with VRA, it is really those enterprise customers, and they're saying, well, I need this to be fully available. I need this to understand the other constructs. So that's why I think this last VMworld was huge, is all these things pulled back together.
Somebody wants to talk to you, Travis.
Yeah, I guess they do. It's District of Columbia. Washington, D.C. is calling me.
Oh, geez. It's the president. You only have 24 hours to save the world, and your daughter's been kidnapped or something. I don't know.
Oh, I haven't seen those Taken movies. I do want to see it. But we digress. So, yeah, I think it really does come together in that type of, a lot of the partner technical advisory board meetings that I sit on a couple times a year, the message we hear from those top reseller partners over and over is, VMware, can you help us integrate these products together? We need more of this integration. We need VRA to talk to NSX, which that probably already has been, but the vCenter, the multi vCenter piece of that is the message, I think, being heard by VMware, and that's where we're seeing adoption from the reseller, and then the customer pieces. Yes, all these VMware products work together. Choose the parts that work best for what you need to solve your business issue, and they'll integrate together. So a lot of that work is finally, I think, coming into the actual release product. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think going back to that use case, right, especially with NSX, it's like what can you not do with this? Like, you look at this example, it's you do distributed 3-tiered applications, across multiple data centers. Each one of these constructs here, being an entire data center. Database and web here, you can distribute it. You can, and I think it also allows for the introduction of disaster avoidance. Mm-hmm. Right. I remember, I tell the story, all the time where, years ago I did I was in a meeting and I asked, what's your current RPO, RTO? And they actually had the gall to say, well, how do you spell that? And it was funny because they thought that it was its own word, and it wasn't a concept that people were really familiar with at that time, and this was some 8 9 years ago, and I'm not talking about enterprises have known that for a long time, but your small medium-sized businesses, it was, well, we have our data center, we make copies of our stuff, and it gets backed up here, and then Bob and Janine take it off to this other place via SneakerNet. But then we started getting into the concept of disaster recovery. Okay, now you've got this, and then it moves over to that. And now I think what we're seeing with these stretched ideas are these concepts of even disaster avoidance. And I think that's where it's becoming really sort of super super relevant and we're seeing, a lot of kind of work inside of that space with customers. Customers no longer think that it's just about DR. It is about, stretching out and doing things, in a very, sort of universal sort of way. And to that end, I've got one.
Yeah, I do have a comment. I would say
Yeah.
I lived that in my previous life in state government. We struggled so long to figure out DR, disaster avoidance, whatever, what have you, even when we had budget and whatnot. I mean, I think this speaks to when we talk about SRM integration with NSX and the whole idea of re-IPing something. It's one thing for an administrator to say, okay, I think we can figure this out and have some type of orchestration. When I went to my DBA to say that, he almost had a heart attack about how can we do this? So our project never really got off the ground. So, I mean, being able to do this and stretch that network, stretch those pieces across, I mean, I think that's huge for so many customers to simplify how that failover or disaster avoidance process really works. So.
Well, and you make a great point with, avoidance and recovery. It's not just about the IPs of the machines, but like we said, it's about the policies. You put a lot of work, you put a lot of sweat into making sure the policies work and everything is on point. And in fact, for a lot of people, it's also a compliance issue, and it's an SLA issue inside of their own thing. A firewall port gets breached, and they have to report it. In one of my past lives, I used to manage an OCC firewall for a federally chartered bank, and it was a nightmare. I mean, because every little change we made, we had a maintenance window for every port change. We had to move the data on the back end so that we could move the ports because the data couldn't be exposed for even a moment. And so we had to dual home databases and all sorts of stuff.
Yes.
I mean, it was crazy. But now inside of this cross vCenter space, now we can have these universal policies across all of this, and that universal policy can apply to absolutely everything. And it's kind of neat. You look at this image. One of my favorites is the fact that inside of this you see the little VMs, and they've each got their little firewall thing. And that's microsegmentation. So even though we have these distributed policies and all this cool stuff, the microsegmentation is still there, protecting each machine as it's moving around between these data centers, whether it's VDI or whatever the heck it is. So I think that's really pretty huge inside of the space. Is that it's not. It's about doing the new things while still maintaining the old stuff.
Mm-hmm, sure.
So I don't think we won't make this too long today. But the other thing I wanted to kind of touch on was how VSAN and how virtual SAN inside of this space kind of folds in with with NSX in sort of a material way, but I think more kind of logical paradigm. If anything, it's less about integrating vSAN and NSX. It's more about understanding where VMware is going, with all of this vision, and saying, this is what we can do with stretching things. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense, or am I reaching?
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, to me, there's two parts of it. There's the NSX and vSAN conversation, but we also see, from a distribution perspective, is vSAN, there's a really broad adoption with that. I mean, we can talk about, stretched clusters and how that can be used in the enterprise space and how that can provide availability. But we also see a lot of SMB, some of the robo. I know we've had some of the video content on remote office, branch office, and we're seeing a lot of adoption there where customers said, I want a two node cluster. Maybe I've got a central office that I can have the other piece of that, the witness on, and now I can start to leverage that more. So I see two different paths when we talk about enterprise and NSX, and we're adopting VRA and vSAN and all these pieces, but I also see vSAN at that other level saying, we can use this for test dev, we can use this for tier 2, tier 3 workloads, or a lot of places tier 1 workloads now. How simple this is, we don't have to have another admin to manage our storage. So there's a ton of options there, I think, around vSAN that we're seeing a lot more interest in. So.
Well, and two, like we said, it's and you kind of called it out very clearly where we have like the enterprise side, high level, and then we've got, and they're doing all of these, fantastic, crazy things. with NSX, and then everybody else who's not inside of that bleeding, enterprise edge, who's they're doing things, with NSX potentially, but they're getting into the ideas of stretching their data centers and not having not renting a Star Destroyer from the Empire to blow up the Death Star. They're DevOps guys are going, well, this is a really bad idea. We need to be more fluid about this. I think that VSAN, and one of the things I wanted to just kind of share is just kind of this concept around the VSAN stretched cluster. VSAN's shown us how to do a lot of things, but now we have the ability to do stretched clusters with VSAN, and we did a video on it, and I think that it's available from Arrow, and maybe I'll even be so clever in editing to be able to actually put a little snapshot of that video up here. Maybe we'll see. But it really speaks to the stretched cluster, and it makes very clear, I think, kind of the concept that the stretched cluster is really just nothing more than kind of the next logical step when we were looking at the fault domain architecture. Being able to say you can fail over virtual SAN, not just inside of the cluster and inside of the nodes inside of the cluster, but across different clusters, and create a fault domain. Once you had a fault domain, that was really, I think, just kind of a stutter step into the concept of a stretched cluster. In my opinion, I think that as long as you kind of get the idea of the fault domain, then it's like, okay, well, really all you're doing is you're taking it from just a cold state, right, an on-off binary state, going back to our initial whiteboard, and you're bringing VSAN into the space where it is in both on and off at any given time, or all on, right? All active, right? It's not just active passive state, it's active now. And it can stretch and it can go across these spaces, and we can do so, even integrating with, our, cloud platform offerings, and, integrating with, other clouds or tertiary data centers, or however you want to do it. And so now if we talk about the integration between what customers can do with virtual SAN and then what they could do with the integration of NSX, I think that there's kind of a great big story to tell. Something I'd like to do, Travis, just to kind of wrap up this session, because I think this is I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, and I think that there's always a danger of doing that.
Yes.
Is just to kind of recap what we would what it would look like. And this might be a fun exercise. We'll kind of do this, and I'll be the pen, and you be you help me be the voice. And we're just going to kind of start off with a whiteboard, and we're going to say what we would say for a small medium sized business customer, right? And kind of what their next steps are, and what they can integrate, and what they could expect to see as they migrate into a unified hybrid cloud. I think that would be really interesting for people. Okay. And who knows, maybe it would even help somebody. So sure. If you don't mind, I'm going to put us both on the spot here. Okay. Remind everyone out in TV land that this is completely unscripted. And so we're gonna do this here, and we're gonna start with the idea that we have. Okay, we've got we've got our disparity, and this small medium sized business customer, they've got a primary data center. Let's hope they do, otherwise they're really not and so that much they have, and maybe out on the horizon somewhere, shameless plug for more VMware product, no, just kidding. They're looking at cloud, and hopefully they're looking at maybe vCloud Air from VMware inside of that space, but that's kind of out there. That's out there. That's not where they are today. How do you feel? Likelihood, probability? Are most customers leveraging secondary data centers for disaster recovery, Travis.
I was going to say that's the first place they start when customers are saying, let's dip our toe in this. We know we want to be able to leverage cloud resources, whatever. I mean, we've always talked about the buzzword of cloud and what that means, but taking that face value, DR is the place we see first adoption, because they feel like, well, I don't have to rely on this for my day-to-day business. It's something easy for me to sort out if I replicate those VMs, of how do I get those in there? Do we use vCloud Connector for, even just a simple one-off? We're going to migrate those. So that's the number one use case we see is, let's start there. Let's figure out how we can get those on-premises VMs into vCloud Air. And then from there, whether it's vCloud Air, DR as a service is one of the pieces we see a lot. So we can leverage vSphere replication. Almost every customer that has Essentials Plus and above already has that. And we can just purchase that DR as a service, which is a very inexpensive offering, and we can replicate. Beyond that, we can start to grow and say, what are your next steps? I think this session is really great, because we always talk about the SDDC journey, or journey to cloud, or whatever you want to call it. There is something for all customers here. Even if they're an Essentials Plus customer, SMB that has 3 hosts, there's a huge opportunity there to use DR as a service, and then kind of grow as they need to from there. So
you're seeing people going from like primary site out to DR as a service as a first big step. And then they're also doing replication between site A and site B for different workloads, or how are you seeing that integrate for people?
Yeah, we may see that as well, depending on those customers. Some of them may have remote office, branch office scenarios. We're seeing a lot more adoption in that area, because they're the customers with multiple sites, or maybe have, if it's a restaurant chain, they need some compute local to that. So that's another piece that we see, is some type of network connectivity between their own sites, and then maybe a tertiary site is DR as a service, or maybe they start to grow into vCloud Air, either dedicated cloud or virtual private cloud offerings, once they see how simple it is to use DR as a service. So.
And I think one of the important things too is that DR as a service isn't just you go out, you don't come back, right? It's not the Hotel California thing, which that always really bothered me, is because I'm a big music fan, and I wasted a lot of years listening to Hotel California, and it is, and it's. The thing is no, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. That's the point. And I've heard people like misquote it, and it's like, I don't think it means exactly what you think it means, but we're going to go with it for this construct.
It sounds creepier that way. I think Don Henley's right on. It's like, okay, well, I checked out, but it's some sort of bad dream. It's like, but I can't.
Exactly. And that hotel's still there, it's outside Palm Springs. But
there's a lot of people there then, if they can never leave. There's growing population.
Exactly. So, it's not just asynchronous where you can dump out, but now you can fail back is native inside of DR as a service. And I think that's important for a lot of folks, because they can fail back there. And, they also have the option. So one of the things that I hear a lot is, and I'll give you kind of one of my scenarios, is I hear people that, they may or may not have these, remote sites out here, but they definitely have a primary site. And it's very common for them to have a secondary site. And between these two, they've got, some shared, some storage, and they might be using even virtual SAN inside of this, which is a great use case for this. And then they're using Site Recovery Manager kind of at the higher level, and then using, like you said, vSphere replication, to move the data between the 2 points. And then they're saying, okay, well, this is maybe like all of our workloads or all of our core workloads. I'm moving all of my tier 1 and 2, workloads out here, inside of this space, right? This is something I get asked a lot. And then now, out of all the tier 1 and tier 2 that are out here, I don't necessarily want to buy a lot of DR as a service. Can I just take the tier 1 and can I trigger DR as a service from this site and go out here so that what I've got is I've got a primary site backing up tier 1 and tier 2 out here. I've got vSphere replication and maybe VSAN down at this level. And then I'm taking all my tier 1s and I'm pushing them out here as well. So that, you've really got, a trinity of backup in place for your tier 1 applications. Mm-hmm. That I think is another, potential use case for kind of next steps. But I think that one thing that seems common from what we're talking about is, next steps that we hear for customers as they're moving toward this unified hybrid cloud is, especially with what Arrow's seeing, is they're seeing adoption of DR as a service in one way or another. Mm-hmm. We're seeing activity around, kind of spreading out their architecture, whether it be through Robo or the integration of Site Recovery Manager, and we're seeing people that are leveraging vSphere replication. What about VSAN? Do you see VSAN as being kind of a solid next step for a lot of people in the unified hybrid cloud kind of converged story?
Yeah, I do. I mean, especially for those customers that don't have the skill sets around storage arrays and whatnot, or even if you just think about scenarios where they do have multiple sites, it's a lot to really bite off and to purchase like arrays and understand the replication. I mean, even if it's asynchronous replication between sites, what do the links look like when it's done in vSAN in software? I mean, maybe we have a few components, array controllers and whatnot, we have to make sure that are correct. But I mean, if it's built into the hypervisor kernel and you already have it, it's not nearly as much of a heavy lift for us to start down that path and go, okay, now we can leverage this between multiple sites. We don't have to have exactly the same type of storage. So we're seeing a lot of traction there. And then the other piece of it, I think, is once customers realize the ease of use of DR as a service, we're seeing a lot of adoption in vCloud Air proper as far as that goes. So they can say, now I can buy virtual private cloud. I can run my workloads out there, even if I don't have a secondary site. Yeah, that infrastructure as a service piece is really next step. It's like, oh, this works and it's easy for me to use. Even if I'm not doing stretched network and whatnot, if I just want to run workloads out there, and then I think we move on into those NSX use cases and whatnot, pulling all that stuff together. So
it sounds like, if I were to kind of encapsulate this, it sounds like what you're seeing and what we're both saying is that for a lot of people going forward into unified hybrid cloud, it's about making sure that they're recoverable first. Mm-hmm. And then, once we have recovery, then learning how to scale. Mm-hmm. And then once we have learned how to scale, then it becomes a matter of how do we secure and how do we refine policy, and that's where NSX starts to step in. And then once we've got that, then it becomes a conversation about automation or what have you.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the path. And that's the good news, I think, for no matter what type of customers our resellers are working with, we got to understand that journey. Where are they at? There's always a solution for that. It's just trying to find what their business issue is and saying, okay, here's your next step, or here's 2 options or 3 options for that next step. And it's on that same continuum.
Oh, excellent. Well, Travis, I mean, you've definitely given me, a lot of great conversation today, as always, and it's always a pleasure. And we said we're gonna try to start condensing these, make them more accessible. There's going to be some streaming stuff on YouTube, and please be sure to keep a lookout and follow, at TL. It's at TL Lawrence, right?
Yes.
So that's T, 2 L, the T and an L, and then a Lawrence. On Twitter, and K Groat, that's K is in Kevin, and then Groat's like goat with an R in it, but you're only allowed to say that once because it evokes too many painful childhood memories. But follow us on Twitter, and we will start posting links for these Google Hangout sessions so you can join in. And we can start having some broader conversations around these things, and we thank you for your time. And any closing messages on behalf of Arrow, Travis?
I would just say thanks for joining us. Yeah, and it'd be great to have others in this conversation, because that's when we really see the interaction really helps. I think when we get on customer calls and reseller calls and say, what are you seeing out there? That's when the real use cases come up, and we get a lot more detail. So
yeah.
Thanks for joining us. So
absolutely. Well, thanks much. And everybody have a fantastic week. And we look forward to talking to you again really soon. All the best.
Thanks, everybody.